The sign read, "Welcome to Ash Hollow," in faded, peeling letters. Beneath it, smaller text boasted, "A quiet place to call home." "More like a place to die of boredom," Nate muttered, his hands gripping the wheel of their rusted station wagon. "Cut it out," Sarah snapped from the passenger seat, her eyes scanning the desolate main street. "This is just a quick stop. We'll eat, sleep, and get back on the road in the morning." In the back seat, Mia and Jake exchanged uneasy glances. The town was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ears and made the air feel heavier. Storefronts were boarded up, the paint on the buildings cracked and weathered. There wasn't a single person in sight. "Are we sure this place even has a motel?" Jake asked, leaning forward. Sarah unfolded a map. "It's marked here. Just a couple of blocks up." "Let's hope they have Wi-Fi," Mia added, her voice wavering as her eyes lingered on a flickering streetlight. "This place feels wrong." Nate chuckled, but it lacked conviction. "It's a pit stop, not a vacation. Relax." The Ash Hollow Motel was a squat, rectangular building with flickering neon letters that spelled ASHOLOW. "Charming," Jake muttered as they piled out of the car. Inside, the lobby smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic. The clerk, an older man with sunken eyes and a thin smile, handed them a single-room key without a word. As they climbed the creaky stairs to their room, Sarah glanced back. Did he even blink? "Don't start," Nate said, brushing past her. Their room was as depressing as the rest of the town, 2 twin beds, a stained carpet, and peeling wallpaper. A single bare bulb buzzed in the ceiling. "Dibs on the bed closest to the door," Mia said, tossing her bag down. "Why?" Jake teased. "So you can run out faster when the zombies come." Mia didn't laugh. Sarah pulled the curtains aside and froze. "Guys, where is everyone?" They crowded around the window. The main street below, already eerily empty when they'd arrived, now seemed off. The faint streetlights illuminated the cracked pavement, but the few cars parked along the road were gone. The lights in the buildings had all gone dark. "It's a small town," Nate said, but his voice wavered. "They probably just go to bed early." Mia snorted. "Sure. That explains why the cars vanished too, right?" The unease followed them to bed. Nate took the floor, grumbling about how his back would hate him in the morning. Sarah curled up on one of the beds, her phone in hand. "I can't get a signal," she said, shaking it in frustration. "Neither can I," Jake added, frowning at his screen. "Figures," Mia muttered. "First the people disappear, now the Wi-Fi." Nate rolled over. "Get some sleep, guys. We'll leave first thing tomorrow." But sleep didn't come easily. Mia woke first, startled by the faint sound of footsteps in the hall. She sat up, her heart racing. "Sarah?" she whispered. Sarah was lying on the other bed, but something was wrong. Her face looked dim, her features blurred, as though she were out of focus. "Sarah?" Mia said again, louder this time. Nate stirred. "What's wrong?" Mia pointed to Sarah, her hand trembling. They all froze as Sarah's body began to flicker, her form fading in and out like a broken TV signal. "Sarah!" Nate shouted, shaking her. But she didn't wake. Instead, her figure dissolved completely, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air where she had been. Mia screamed. Mia's scream pierced the silence, sending Nate and Jake into action. Nate leapt from the floor, frantically patting the bed where Sarah had just been, as if she might reappear with enough effort. "She was right here," he shouted. Mia backed into the corner, her face pale and her hands trembling. She just disappeared. Like she was erased. Jake stared at the empty bed, his breath quick and shallow. "This isn't real. This isn't happening." Nate turned to Mia, his voice sharp. "What did you see? What happened to her?" "She started flickering," Mia stammered, her voice breaking. Like static. "And then, she was gone." Jake grabbed Nate's arm. "We need to get out of here. Right now." "Not without Sarah," Nate growled, but his own fear was evident in his voice. "She's gone, Nate," Jake shouted. "If we don't leave now, we could be next." The group bolted from the motel room, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. As they reached the lobby, they saw that the clerk's desk was now abandoned, the dim lamp casting eerie shadows over the empty space. "Where is everyone?" Mia whispered. Jake pulled open the front door, and the cold night air hit them like a wall. The street outside was completely dark now, the streetlights flickering sporadically. "It's quieter," Nate muttered, scanning the street. "Too quiet." The cars, the faint hum of machinery, even the rustle of the wind, it was all gone. The town was blanketed in an unnatural silence, as if the world had been muted. "Where's our car?" Mia asked suddenly. The station wagon, parked just outside the motel when they'd arrived, was gone. "Are you kidding me?" Nate growled. He ran into the street, looking up and down for any sign of movement. "This can't be happening." Jake pulled his phone from his pocket, holding it up like a beacon. "No signal," he said. "Try yours," Nate ordered Mia. Mia fumbled with her phone, her hands shaking. She stared at the screen, her breath hitching. "What is it?" Jake asked. Mia turned the phone toward them. On the screen was a single message, blinking faintly. "You are next." Mia threw the phone as though it had burned her. It clattered to the pavement, the screen cracking. "Okay, screw this," Jake said, his voice rising. "We're finding someone, anyone, who can tell us what the hell is going on." They moved down the main street, their footsteps sounding unnaturally loud. The buildings around them seemed more decayed than before, their windows black and hollow. "Do you hear that?" Mia whispered. The group stopped, straining to listen. Faint, disjointed whispers drifted through the air, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "It's coming from there," Nate said, pointing to a small diner at the corner of the street. Its sign hung lopsided, the neon letters flickering erratically. "I'm not going in there," Mia said, her voice trembling. "We don't have a choice," Nate replied, already moving toward the door. Inside, the diner was eerily pristine. The tables were set as if waiting for customers, plates of uneaten food and half-empty coffee cups sitting untouched. "It's like they just vanished," Jake said, his voice hushed. Mia stayed near the door, her eyes darting to every shadow. "We need to leave. This place isn't safe." Before anyone could respond, the whispers grew louder, their disjointed syllables forming faint, fragmented words. "They're watching," the voice said, distorted and hollow. The jukebox in the corner crackled to life, its lights flashing as a slow, haunting tune began to play. "Guys," Jake said, backing toward the door. "We need to." He froze mid-sentence. "What?" Nate asked, turning to him. Jake's form flickered, his body shimmering like static on an old TV. "Jake!" Mia screamed, reaching for him. But before she could touch him, his figure dissolved into a fine mist, vanishing before their eyes. Mia collapsed to her knees, sobbing. "This can't be happening. This can't be happening." Nate pulled her to her feet. "We have to keep moving. Whatever's happening here, we're not going to figure it out by staying in one place." Mia nodded weakly, though tears streamed down her face. The whispers grew louder, the air thickening with an oppressive weight. The words were clearer now. "You don't belong." Nate grabbed Mia's arm and pulled her out of the diner, the haunting tune of the jukebox fading as they stumbled back onto the street. But the town looked different now. The buildings were darker, more decayed, their edges blurred and faint, as if the town itself was starting to fade. "What's happening?" Mia whispered, her voice breaking. Nate didn't answer. He was staring at his hands, which were beginning to shimmer, fading in and out like a bad signal. Nate stared at his hands in horror as they flickered like static. His fingers shimmered, losing solidity before snapping back into focus for just a moment. "Nate!" Mia cried, grabbing his arm. "What's happening to you?" "I don't know," he shouted, panic lacing his voice. "I can feel it, like I'm slipping away." Mia's grip tightened, her heart racing as she glanced around the street. The whispers were louder now, surrounding them, but the town itself was crumbling, windows shattering, buildings bending inward as though the very fabric of reality was collapsing. "We have to find a way out," Mia said, her voice trembling. Nate nodded, though his eyes were wide with fear. "If this town doesn't want us here, maybe we can find the edge of it. Maybe we can escape." They ran down the street, the pavement beneath their feet cracking with each step. Every direction they turned seemed to shift, the roads warping and stretching like a surreal maze. Mia glanced behind them, her stomach twisting in terror. Shadows moved along the edges of her vision, tall, humanoid shapes that seemed to melt into the darkness whenever she tried to focus on them. "Nate, they're following us," she shouted. "Just keep moving," he yelled back, his voice raw with desperation. The whispers grew sharper, more defined. "You don't belong here." They stumbled into what looked like a gas station, its fluorescent lights flickering weakly. The shelves were stocked with ancient, rusting cans, and a thin layer of dust coated everything. "We need to stop," Nate said, leaning against the counter. His breathing was ragged, his body shimmering faintly in the dim light. Mia grabbed a bottle of water from one of the shelves, twisting it open and handing it to him. "Drink this." Nate took a sip but froze mid-swallow, his eyes locked on something behind her. "Mia, don't move," he whispered. She turned slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. Behind the counter stood a man, or what used to be a man. His skin was pale and stretched unnaturally tight over his bones. His eyes were sunken, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. "You shouldn't be here," the man rasped, his voice echoing unnaturally. Mia backed away, her hands trembling. "We don't want to be here. Please, just let us leave." The man tilted his head, his hollow gaze fixed on her. "No one leaves. Not once they're part of this place." "What does that mean?" Nate demanded, stepping forward. "What is this place?" The man's face contorted into something resembling a smile, but it was wrong, too wide, too sharp. "Ash Hollow is not a town. It's a memory. And memories don't let go." The man dissolved into a wisp of black smoke, vanishing before their eyes. The whispers surged, filling the gas station like a swarm of voices pressing against them. Mia grabbed Nate's arm. "We can't stay here." But as they turned to leave, the lights flickered out entirely, plunging the gas station into darkness. A single voice cut through the whispers, clear and chilling. "Your time is running out." When the lights blinked back on, they were no longer in the gas station. They stood in the middle of a dark field, surrounded by the remnants of Ash Hollow. The town had collapsed entirely, its buildings reduced to crumbling ruins. The air felt thicker, heavier, and the shadows that had followed them now loomed closer, circling them like predators. Mia clung to Nate, her voice trembling. "We're disappearing, just like the town. We're becoming part of this place." Nate's body flickered again, his form growing fainter. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand taller. "No. We're getting out of here. There has to be a way." From the darkness ahead, a faint light appeared, a single glowing orb, hovering in the void. "Do you see that?" Mia whispered. Nate nodded. "It's our only chance." They stumbled toward the light, their bodies growing weaker with each step. Behind them, the shadows hissed and growled, closing in. As they reached the orb, it flared brighter, revealing a weathered sign. "You can leave, but not together." The light dimmed, and the whispers grew louder. The glowing sign flickered, its ominous message burning itself into their minds. "You can leave, but not together." Mia stared at the words, her chest tightening as the weight of their meaning sank in. "What does it mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Nate's body flickered again, his form growing faint and translucent. He pressed his hands against the sign, as though trying to will it to change. "This has to be a trick. There's no way we're splitting up." The whispers rose into a cacophony, swirling around them like a living thing. The shadows drew closer, their vague, humanoid forms becoming more distinct. Their jagged limbs and eyeless faces seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. "We don't have time," Mia said, her voice breaking. "Nate, we have to choose. I'm not leaving you here." Nate shouted, his hands clenching into fists. Mia's eyes filled with tears. "If one of us doesn't leave, we'll both disappear. Look at yourself, Nate, you're fading." "I don't care," he snapped, though his voice wavered. "I'm not abandoning you." The light from the orb dimmed, the shadows closing in. The air felt suffocating, as though the town itself was pressing against them, demanding their decision. Mia turned to Nate, her hands trembling. "Maybe if you go, you can find a way to pull me out. We don't know what's on the other side. It might not even mean forever." "No," Nate said firmly, shaking his head. "If anyone's going, it's you. You've got more of a chance out there. Look at me, I'm already halfway gone." Mia's lip quivered. "Don't say that." The shadows hissed, their movements becoming more aggressive. One of them lunged forward, its jagged arms slashing at the ground just inches from them. The orb flared again, brighter this time, its voice ringing out. "Decide now, or you both stay." Mia grabbed Nate's hand, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this without you." "You don't have a choice," Nate said softly. He gave her hand a firm squeeze, his own grip feeling weak and insubstantial. "You have to go. I'll find a way back to you. I promise." "Nate." "Mia, go." The orb pulsed one final time, its light washing over them. Mia hesitated for a fraction of a second, her heart breaking, before stepping forward into the light. The last thing she saw was Nate smiling faintly, his body almost completely faded. Mia stumbled into blinding sunlight, her knees hitting the rough pavement. Gasping for air, she looked around. She was standing on the side of a road, surrounded by endless forest. There was no sign of Ash Hollow, no buildings, no ruins, no glowing orb. It was as though the town had never existed. "Nate," she called, her voice cracking. But he wasn't there. The silence of the forest was deafening. Mia clutched her chest, the weight of guilt and fear pressing down on her. She checked her phone, but it was dead, the screen refusing to light up no matter how many times she pressed the button. She screamed his name again, her voice echoing uselessly into the empty woods. And then she saw it. A faint shimmer in the air, just at the edge of the road. It was almost imperceptible, but when she focused, she could make out a figure, a vague, flickering outline. "Nate," she cried, running toward it. The shimmer froze, and for a brief moment, she could see him. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear and something else, resignation. "Mia," he said, his voice distorted and faint, as though it were coming from far away. "It's not over." "What do you mean?" she begged, tears streaming down her face. "I'll come back for you. Just tell me how." Nate opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the shimmer dissolved, and he was gone. Mia stood frozen, the quiet of the forest pressing in around her. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her pocket, the sound breaking the oppressive silence. She yanked it out, her hands shaking. The screen lit up with a single message. "One will stay, and one will fade." Mia dropped the phone, her knees buckling as the realization hit her. She had escaped Ash Hollow. But Nate never would. Mia stared at the phone on the ground, its screen glowing faintly against the cracked pavement. The words, "One will stay, and one will fade," burned into her mind. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's not how this ends." She picked up the phone, gripping it tightly. "Nate, if you can hear me, I'm coming back. I'm not leaving you there." The forest was silent, save for the rustling of leaves in the wind. The shimmer where Nate had appeared was gone, leaving no trace of him behind. Mia's hands trembled as she turned in circles, desperate for any sign of the town or the glowing orb. "Come on," she begged. "Bring me back. I'll take his place if I have to, just let me fix this." The phone buzzed in her hand again. This time, the screen showed a new message. "He's already part of the memory." Her knees gave out, and she collapsed onto the road, her tears falling freely. "Please," she sobbed, clutching the phone. "Please don't take him from me. There has to be a way." The air around her grew cold, and the faint smell of decay seeped in. She looked up and froze. The shimmer had returned. It was faint, but it was growing stronger. The outline of the town began to reappear, flickering in and out like an old projection. The broken buildings, the twisting shadows, even the cracked pavement of Ash Hollow streets began to take shape around her. And then, she saw him. Nate stood at the edge of the shimmer, his form faint and flickering like static. His eyes met hers, filled with sorrow. "Mia, stop," he said softly. She scrambled to her feet. "I can save you. I'll trade places, or whatever it takes. Just tell me what to do." Nate shook his head, his smile faint but kind. "You can't. It doesn't work like that." "Yes, it does," she shouted. "They said one of us could leave. That means one of us can go back. I'll take your place. You don't understand, Nate said, stepping closer. His form shimmered, threatening to dissolve entirely. Ash Hollow isn't a place. It's a trap. Once it has you, it doesn't let go. Mia reached out, but her hand passed through him like smoke. Nate, please, she begged. You can't just stay there. You don't belong there. He laughed softly, though there was no joy in it. I don't think I belong anywhere now. Ash Hollow has already claimed me. Her chest tightened, and she shook her head. No. I won't accept that. I'll find another way. There has to be. Nate stepped closer, his fading form barely holding together. You're safe now, Mia. That's all I care about. The shimmer began to collapse, the town's outline breaking apart. The shadows loomed closer, hissing and twisting as they encircled Nate. No. Mia screamed, lunging forward. But it was too late. The shimmer vanished entirely, taking Nate and Ash Hollow with it. Mia fell to the ground, her sobs racking her body. The forest was silent again, as though nothing had happened. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, empty and quiet. Her phone buzzed one last time. She stared at the screen through her tears. He chose to stay so you could leave. Don't let his choice be in vain. The message faded, and the screen went black. Mia stood up slowly, the weight of Nate's sacrifice pressing down on her. She looked at the road ahead, the endless stretch of forest, and took a shaky breath. I'll never forget you, she whispered. As she walked away, the forest seemed to watch, its silence heavy and knowing. And deep within the void where Ash Hollow had once been, Nate stood among the shadows, his form fading into memory. His voice was soft, but resolute. I'll keep you safe, Mia. Always. And then, he was gone.